acknowledgements. And I put acknowledgements in here kind of in the follow-through because I thought it was a good place to put it, but I want to talk about acknowledgements. That's our cachet, that's our payment. In education, I think, and especially special ed, we are people of service. None of us went into special ed because we thought we would get rich. And if you did, the joke is on you. We're in special education because, again, we're people of service. And when we acknowledge people, yes, acknowledging people for doing a good job for the job they're supposed to do is still very appropriate in what we should be doing. I started years ago writing notes. I was a note writer. And I imposed upon myself, when I had a line position, I would write 5 thank you notes or notes of acknowledgement per day. And I would write those to people who I'd worked with the previous day. And they had to be very specific. Thank you, Darren, for the great draft you brought in to little Johnny's IEP meeting yesterday. It did a great job in moving the group along. Something like that. It wasn't, boy, I really liked that shirt you had on yesterday, Darren. No, it wasn't. It was professional and to the point. Now, I did it not for selfish motives. I did it because I can remember people writing notes to me and how much I appreciated it, and I wanted to model that behavior. But what I realized later in my career was how important it was for those people who I acknowledged what it did for them. That they felt worthy and like they were accomplishing and doing a good job professionally. When I retired, they gave me a little function and people came and brought notes I had written to them years before. They had saved them. Now, I was overwhelmed with the fact that I had been a small part of that, but the real joy came when I realized what it meant to that individual and how it had acknowledged them. I had one teacher tell me that I had written a note to a colleague in her school in a couple of years ago, and that she had taped it to her bathroom mirror because she wanted it to be the last thing she saw before she went to bed and the first thing she saw when she got up. I was overwhelmed. I was touched. But it wasn't about me. It was about them. But you know what? It came back to me tenfold. A lot of times I would have to go to somebody and say, look, I know this is beyond your contract day. And I know that you don't have to do this. But would you, and then typically 99 times out of 100, say, well, of course I'll be happy to. It was because they felt valued. So think about how you can value your colleagues. A year ago now, about this time of year, we were doing this, and I was giving this little talk, and there were almost exclusively classroom teachers, special ed teachers in the room. And there was a young teacher who said, I need to share with you what my principal did at Christmas. She said he wrote a letter about everybody on the faculty and staff, an individual letter, as her voice begins to crack. And she said, and he sent it to our mamas and daddies. No, not the parents of the students. They're the teachers' parents. And where the parents weren't available, he would send it to a significant other person in that teacher's life. Now, this girl could hardly control her emotions. She was so overwhelmed by the way this principal had shown this gratitude and appreciation. And I'm standing up here thinking, and I bet you would walk through broken glass barefooted for him. And I know he didn't do it selfishly, but it's so important that we acknowledge people for what they do, even if they're, yes, that's their job. but let's acknowledge them. Had the privilege of making kind of I guess the opening address to a group for starting the school year. This was a fairly large urban school district. A lot of people in the audience. And I was talking about this. And again, I kind of always leave how to get a hold of me if you want to continue this conversation. This was on a Friday. Monday morning, when I checked my email, there was an email from a lady who was in that group. And she said, Doug, I wanted to write to you and tell you I cashed 2 checks over the weekend. She said, I was in a grocery store and a mother came up to me and introduced herself, and I remembered who she was, she said, and she thanked me for the profound difference that I had made in their family's life as a teacher for this child. She said, I just floated out of the grocery store. She says, Sunday, I was at church, and a young man who I had taught several years ago found me, asked for me, seeking me at church. She said, I hadn't seen him for years. He hugged me, told me what he was doing, where he was living, the work he was engaged in. And she said, I could read this through the email, the emotion. And she said, he looked at me and said, I'm doing this because of you. You know, that's when we get paid. That's our cachet. I encourage you, think about how you can acknowledge the people you work with. And we're not doing it selfishly, but I promise you it will come back tenfold.